Hi everybody, Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget. Hello.
And this is number 201. This is one of the easiest ones to remember for us because last week was 200 and this is 201. And thank you for people who have just written to us recently. They haven't exactly said, I wonder why you continue this long, but some people must be wondering. Do you think
Somebody
so?
said 200 not out.
That's true. That's
a
true.
cricketing term. That was fair enough.
Yeah. The idea of me ever getting 200 not out. Anyway. Yes, well, the rain is almost stopped here.
So cold.
Yeah, it's been really, really cold here.
It has, yeah. But there we are. It is, after all, it's spring in the UK. So what do we expect, really? Actually, we expect a bit more than this, to be honest, don't we? We're all a bit fed up, really.
However, we've had our grass cut.
Oh, we have,
which
yes.
is brilliant.
Well, that's like bringing the wilderness under control.
This is the bad cut, and then next time it will be beautiful.
It will turn into a perfect lawn, won't it?
This week, we found ourselves talking about a subject that is around all the time, which we'll come back to in a moment. But it was a passage from Hebrews. The thing about the Bible is that either you read things and you don't notice them, or you do notice them, but you don't see the significance in them. And just we were having breakfast with some friends, and one of them read a passage from Hebrews, and it really struck us. Why did it strike us so strongly?
Well, it was clearly answering questions of people who were piddled off, fed up, struggling to understand why.
Do people in the Bible get piddled off?
Well, I think they probably do. No, I mean, it's the passage from Hebrews, and actually there's some bits of Hebrews that we really love, aren't there? One of our, one or two very favourite bits have been plucked out by us to use, one of them being the thing about going outside the city walls to share in the disgrace of Jesus has come to mean an enormous amount.
And high priest.
And the great high priest who understands everything because he's been tempted in every way. So we have these little bits, and like many people, I think, we kind of pick bits that we particularly like and don't always concentrate on all the rest. And this was a really interesting bit. Now, I very rarely read passages from the Bible on this recording, but shall I read?
Yeah, read some of it.
Okay, I'll read some of it anyway. In Hebrews 11, the writer, and apparently in the very, very early days of research, they thought it was definitely by Paul. It had got to be by Paul because Paul wrote letters, and then since then they've decided they haven't actually got a clue who wrote it. They do think it was written at a time when Christians were being persecuted. They think it was probably written to Christians living in Italy and therefore would have been persecuted, probably by the Emperor Nero. I don't think anybody quite knows, but it's all about... What is it about? I think it's because the people who are really struggling are being tempted to look back to what it was like to follow the Jewish law and the great festivals and the sacrifices, when they knew exactly where they were. Yes. And obviously these were people living sometime after the great miracles, the miracle of Pentecost, the very early incredible healings and things. I think it looks as though it was all a bit later than that. Anyway, first of all, the writer, I'm going to say bangs on about some of the great heroes of the Old Testament, and he goes through them. I mean, there's Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham, and then after going on, and Joshua, and then he really gets going and he says, what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who all through their faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promises. They shut the mouths of lions and quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, and so on and so on.
Made mistakes and screwed up.
Well, none of that is actually mentioned.
No, I know. Anyway, go on.
No, I mean, none of it is mentioned. It's all about these heroes of the faith. And of course, the early Christians knew all these heroes of the faith. And suddenly there they are. Life is not going well. Answers are not being given.
There's a question right in the middle of that, of course, isn't there? Which is that if you read about the heroes of the faith, some of them did do very well, but some really did not.
No, I mean, David screwed up quite badly,
Yes, he
didn't he?
did,
Gideon,
yeah.
at the end of all his wonderful work for God, in the weakness becoming power, destroying the Midianites, actually went on destroying quite a lot of other people and not doing very well at all.
It is the disease of positiveness that I think that somehow there seems, and it still happens now in things you hear, in talks or sermons and things, that as long as something sounds positive, it's probably good.
Yeah.
Whereas in fact, we lose an awful lot of the reality of
Yes, I think
Christian living.
that's true. I mean, there's one bit,
don't
by
accept
faith the
that.
people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. Sorry, I didn't say that very well, but by faith. I don't think they walked by faith. I think they were...
They were a miserable bunch of complainers.
Well, they were later on.
Yeah.
Yes, they were.
They said, why, we had food in Egypt.
They did.
Well, yeah, we don't have any food here.
No, let's
we-
go back
we don't
to
like the
where things were
quails.
okay.
We don't like the
Yes.
whatever it was that
Yeah,
fell from
yeah,
the sky.
Yeah.
And we want a God we can see that's shiny
yes.
in the end.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But then, I mean, the thing about this passage, it then does go on to talk to the people who are having a really rough time.
Yeah.
I mean, a seriously rough time. I mean,
Yeah.
if we can complain, let's have a look. The others were tortured. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put in prison. It gets even worse. They were stoned and sawn in two, put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, ill-treated. They wandered in deserts and mountains and lived in caves and holes in the ground. And then, and this was the thing we found interesting, wasn't it? Apart from coming back to some of the things about it all being a bit shiny, they were all condemned for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. And I thought, is that true? And I
promised
thought,
by God.
Yes,
God.
and I thought Noah didn't end up much of a hero, did he? I mean, the last part of his story is about him getting drunk. And Moses didn't get into Canaan. They didn't get that immediate reward, that shiny reward.
No,
So
they
I
didn't.
think they're trying to say, I think the writer is trying to say, you know, even if things are looking pretty awful, what are they trying to say, do you think? Even if things are pretty terrible, and we know some people for whom today
Yeah.
is awful, that's not what Jesus promised. Everything
That's
about
right,
Jesus
yeah.
was talking
Yeah.
about what you yourself could become. In other words, you could become more of a servant, more like Jesus, more forgiving, more the person that Jesus was, the God that Jesus represented. But that's not very shiny.
I don't think the living of the Christian faith, I mean, the longer I live, the less I think it is very shiny. Not in worldly terms anyway. There's an odd tension there. There always has been since I first became a Christian, and we were so positive, you know. I mean, God could do no wrong because he was perfect, and I still go along with that. But but the result of that never going wrong isn't that we are rescued constantly. And I know we talk about this a lot, but it's really important because we sing and dance and make a lot of noise.
Can I just say you do not dance?
I do not dance, but we do a lot about how God will always keep his promises, always keep his promises. I hear it over and over again. Well, yeah, but the main promise that is made is to do, I think now, with doing what the young ruler with Jesus didn't do, which was to follow him and be with him. And Jesus is the man of sorrows who was acquainted with grief. So
I think that is
you
what
just hold that up.
I mean, I think that's what quite a lot of the earlier part of Hebrews is saying, that Abraham set out not knowing where he was going. Moses had to set off with his motley crew again, not knowing where he was going, and following something that was far more nebulous than it's often portrayed by people looking back at it, that it was neat and tidy. And I think that is what this writer is trying to say.
Do you think the same thing happens with the early church, that we deified the church at that time as being a perfect thing?
Oh, I'm sure we do. I'm sure we do. And in a way, that's what's important about this, because that period, that golden period, lasted only for a very little while, and then people were scattered, they were persecuted, and they were misunderstood, which is what this is saying. You know, a lot of you won't be getting much of a reward at the moment. It won't be too great.
Well, it's a bit hard when people are being whipped and sawn in half to suggest that there's some sort of redeeming feature in that, because there isn't. It's absolutely awful. And I know people we know now we're always talking about this, going through really, really hard times.
And I mean, in the areas, as we know as well in the world, where people are being really badly persecuted for being Christians, oddly enough, maybe they would relate to this really strongly, that they're understanding that it isn't about having a great time. It can't be. So the whole health and wealth thing is totally irrelevant to what was happening then and what is happening now. And maybe what is happening in all of us, that as soon as we start to think that following Jesus means we are in the good times, that yes, there are moments where it couldn't be anything but the very best.
We've had some wonderful times.
Of course.
In our lives as followers, we've had some absolutely terrible, dismal times. And I keep coming back to the fact that Jesus was not a happy fella most of the time. He was dealing with all sorts of things, including, if Tom Wright is to be agreed with, the temptation to believe that he was not who he said he was.
Yes, I mean, you have to put that alongside the fact there was something incredibly attractive about him. You know, I don't mean looks. I mean something about him that meant that people were following him round the edge of Galilee, which is actually quite a large
Excuse me,
lake.
Jesus just said to me, I actually was rather cool in my looks.
Well, I think people did think he was very cool. What I mean is it's that's not quite the important bit. But there was something extraordinary about him that made people walk forever.
There was,
to
and
hear the stories.
I tell you what part of it was, that he told the truth.
Yeah.
And that's very unusual with leaders and those who are trying to persuade other people to do things. And there was no easy way for him to he didn't want to. There was no way to make the Christian life a piece of cake.
No. Well, every story contained something that was so challenging for the people listening, yet still they walked round the edge of Galilee to listen to him. These were not soppy stories.
With no food.
With no food as well. But I'll tell you what, you know, I was thinking about, Adrian, and I think this, I don't know, it kind of, you know, we were talking about the children of Israel and the fact that they were such a moany lot. They did not walk by faith. They staggered along behind Moses and Aaron and Miriam and some of the other people who were trying to keep them going. And yet, there's an and yet. And it reminded me, you know, I remember you once saying about the children of Israel, talking about the fact that they...
I tell you, let's start at the beginning, because it was about Kate, our daughter.
No, well, I was getting there. I was saying
but that's in the middle of that.
Okie-doke.
Because
I'll let you get on.
What it was that we were in France with the kids and the bikes in Dieppe.
Yeah, well, let's just that's three of our kids. So two of them were on bikes themselves,
right, yeah.
and Kate was in a bucket seat on the back of your bike.
That's correct, yeah. So the boys in the front were going on, racing on, enjoying their bike ride.
Terrifyingly.
I had my daughter, who I loved very much, in the seat on the back of my bike. And we were going up a hill, and the boys were going up very fast, and we were crawling up. In fact, I think we probably stopped. And the only words she said, really, during the ascent of the hill were the words that all parents have heard forever, and Moses must have heard many, many times, "Are we there yet?" So, I mean, but apart from anything else, Moses, I imagine Moses saying, "No, we are not there yet." And they said, "Well, it's been 40 years." He said, "Yeah, well," and they said, "We'll be dead by the time we get there." And he must have thought, "Well, I hope you are. You're such a moany crowd." But that's interesting. I mean, there is a kind of tipping thing with this, that whenever you encounter, as I was reading Chesterton the other day, whenever you encounter complication and you embrace it and pursue it, it can turn into something that looks very much like faith, like something cleaner and better. And often, I mean, I remember, for instance, and I've written about it, some people might have read it, but going to this place where I was talking to elderly people, and it's probably one of the worst 25 minutes of my life, delivering my best material, whatever that is, to a number of people who glared at me because I was simply an interruption to their having their tea. But after that, I met somebody who had known Studdock Kennedy, who was a great hero of mine, and I sat drinking tea and listening to a memory of something so important to me that I couldn't believe it. And when I look back, that seems to be a bit of a pattern, that you never quite know the reason for what you're doing. And if you judge it by its surface, it doesn't work. I mean, with Kate, as we both know, we hung around in the church for ages, didn't we, when we got back to Dieppe?
Well, we had an hour to go before our boat was due, our ferry.
Right, yeah.
And so we went into this cathedral. And I think the whole point about this is that there always have been moments for all of these people, persecuted or not, where suddenly they did know why they were doing it. And this was an extraordinary little moment, wasn't it? And I know some people will have heard this, but it never fades in our memory, does it?
No, I think
she was only 3, wasn't she?
I'm not sure how old she was, but it was a forming thing for me, because I just started doing all this stuff, going around talking and stuff, and we were walking round the cathedral, or this big church, and I found Kate standing in front of one of those statues of Mary holding the body of her son, and she was just staring at it, and she asked me what the holes were in his side, and
I remember.
What were the holes in his feet.
Oh, and the worst.
And then the awful question. Well, she said they didn't nail his hands, did they?
She said, Daddy, they've got holes in his hands.
Yeah, she said they didn't do that,
hands,
did they?
Yeah.
And everything in me wanted to say, no, of course not. But I had to say, well, yeah, they did. And she went up, put her arm round him and said, poor Jesus. And what happened then, to me anyway, was that the whole morass of stuff that had got in the way between when I was first, as you said earlier, attracted to him, and now when I was engaged in all sorts of stuff that might have some worth at some point, but I just wanted to go back to that. And the value of that, or the worth of that, is almost impossible to describe. It's like with the marriage, I think I could say that we love each other very much, and those things are incalculable. It's very hard to know how you say that, the feeling of that. So, and I would never say, and that makes all the suffering worthwhile, because I don't know if it does or not, but ultimately...
No, well, I mean, the writer of Hebrews had some quite clear things about that, about God being a father and disciplining his children. I don't quite know how that goes along with being sawn in two, if I'm honest. I think that's a bit harsh, but but there's an amazing bit that I've always loved, which is about, which says, I haven't got it in front of me, but it's something like, right, so stand up straight, pull yourself together and carry on. And there are those moments like you're talking about in Dieppe, moments that we all have where there's something that helps you to think, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to get up. I've been sitting there feeling lost, feeling that this can't be right, this can't be the promise, this can't be what I thought it was going to be. And then something in you says, come on, up you get, keep going. Yeah, I think that there are happy endings in a lot of the stories. The story of Naomi, it's not what she wanted. She didn't get what she wanted. She went back to Bethlehem desperately unhappy, very bitter, very angry, feeling that God had forsaken her. And there's that beautiful bit where she is presented by Ruth and Boaz with her grandson. Obed. And she takes him on her lap, and the women of Bethlehem look at her and say, see, she's got a son, because having a grandson, a son, is part of the line that carries on. But she could never have known that. No. And I suppose that's what this writer is talking about, and what I suppose we all have to face, is that we don't jolly well know any more than Moses knew where he was going, or Abraham knew he was going. And it's so neat to say by faith they did it, but they did keep going despite doubts.
And even when she had Obed, she would still have had the pain of losing all the people who she loved. But she had got a little boy on her lap, and it didn't take the pain away. But it was a new thing and a beautiful thing. And I don't know where you go from there, except to say that the sum of it all is that I want the beautiful thing more than I want anything else, I think.
And maybe there is a lesson in looking at it and thinking, well, yeah, there's always going to be these great men of faith, women of faith, people who did incredible things, people who, because of their faith, etc., etc. But actually, if you're going through something really horrid, what was it you said that Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going?
That's right, yeah.
That there will come a moment where you suddenly, it becomes a bit clearer again. You're coming out of the dark again, and you're keeping going, and you're looking forwards again, which is what it's always been all about, really. That's the big promise, isn't it? Something to look forward to look towards.
A man of sorrows who's acquainted with grief and loves sitting by a fire, eating fish with his friends. So it's everything. It's everything. Anyway, we're probably as confused now as we were before we started. But
well, you think we've confused everybody else as
there's
well. As always, we love to hear from you, and we'll talk to you next week.